Good morning, everyone, and welcome, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. We have a truly global panel today joining us for our weekly webinar. Once again, my name is Sean Winter. I'm Vice President of Global Client Success at Movius. I am on the East Coast of the United States, based out of Richmond, Virginia, and I'm joined today by Farron Lyons and Stuart Jackson. And I'll let them introduce themselves in a second. Today's topic is tips and tricks to securely enable remote workers. We know that we're all going through a lot of change now. Some of us are more comfortable than others with the idea of working from home. And with that comes a lot of challenges in terms of security, compliance, continuity plans, et cetera. So we're gonna dive deep into that with a couple of experts today. And on that note, I will turn to our panelists to introduce themselves, maybe give us a little background, tell us where they are, make sure that they're doing okay in the pandemic. So Farron, I'll start with you, and then we'll go across the pond, if that's all right.
Sounds good. Thank you, Sean. Farron Lyons. I sit down in Southern California in Los Angeles and have been with BlackBerry for about 3 years. Come to that through content management, workflow, process automation kind of world. Yeah, I've been working from home in this role for about 20 years.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for joining us, Farron.
Thanks for having me.
And Stuart, I know it's a different time of day for you. We're approaching pub time. If the pubs are open.
Almost, if they're open. If only they were open. So yeah, same. So I'm based in the UK, as you may be able to tell from my accent. I'm also part of the BlackBerry team. Been around BlackBerry now since the acquisition of Good Technology back in 2016, 2017. Prior to that, I was at Good Technology from around 2012. So we kind of rode the wave of remote working, moving, ironically, people away from BlackBerries into Apple and Android devices in the past. So we're obviously very familiar with this process of working from home and obviously making people available no matter where they are in the world. So that's kind of my background. And so I run the EMEA sales engineering or solution engineering team in this region.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for being here as well. For those of you on the call, I'll be doing my best to monitor both the chat and the Q&A function within Zoom. So if you have any questions, again, this is a pretty casual conversation. We're not going to be showing many slides today. Feel free to post them and I will try to weave them into the conversation. Be as rude as you like. We want to make this as interactive as possible. We know that that's challenging given the current scenario, but feel free to ask away. And we have a couple of great experts on the call who I'm sure would be happy to answer your questions. But I will kick it off to get us started. Now, typically when we talk about crisis management or continuity plans, it's often around a sort of a singular time-bound event, a natural disaster or something where, you know, a hurricane comes, we have to leave the office, and then 2 days later we're back. Obviously, COVID-19 is a very different scenario in that it's not as time-bound as we would probably all like, or at least not yet. What best practices have you all seen from your customer base regarding continuity plans, given the completely different nature of this pandemic compared to, you know, big issues, natural disasters that we've seen in the past?
Yeah, so I think from my point, you know, obviously I get a view of what's going on in EMEA, but also around the world. We deal with a number of the significant size banks, so we obviously have to deal with their scenarios. Now, as you mentioned, in a BCP plan or a disaster recovery mode, what we have to bear in mind is that we might be a very short-lived or a very interim problem that we can then recover from very quickly. 9 times out of 10, a disaster recovery plan is that an entire data center goes down and then you bring everything up and that might take a week and then it fails back. That's something that is the usual case. I think in this one, because there's almost no known end or even planned end, we just don't know when we're going to come back into the normal world. And I think there's a big piece around this at the moment we're seeing in the media, which is about what is the new normal, what will happen after this situation. So what do we see customers doing right now? Well, they're trying to expand on our products in terms of what they're doing, in terms of broadening the scope of users being remotely enabled, being able to communicate to their infrastructure and do that primarily and core in a secure way. And so we're seeing numbers of activations in our infrastructure of people coming on board and trying to enable them. And one of the critical parts to this is that anyone who, if you were to have a successful strategy around this, you have to make your users productive. It's all very well saying you have to be secure, that's absolute, but also it's not always the case. It's not always the easiest thing to implement. But the problem is that if you create productivity, or you lack productivity, capability, and it's exactly the same challenge you have when you're on premise, is that people will create work from home shadow IT. They will try to figure out a way to get around the system. And so those that have been unique in getting up to speed very fast and have actually maintained their business are those that have been able to work from home very quickly with any surface. Doesn't matter whether it's a desktop or a laptop, but also on their remote products as well. And that's been a key scenario, I think, in the success or failure of some of the businesses out there.
Yeah,
No, that makes sense. Farron, what about from your perspective on continuity plans, what you're seeing?
yeah. The length of this test of our plans has definitely thrown a wrench into it. But I think also the kind of breadth of folks that we've got to enable with these solutions. You know, folks who aren't road warriors, folks who don't have the corporate issued phone, but are just as critical to company operations. And what a lot of folks have had to do is kind of shoehorn masses into systems that weren't designed for that kind of volume or throughput. And it's also been issues with ramping up those solutions and getting people the hardware, the software, servers, and things like that have just ballooned expenses. And if we think about preparation, or when we come back to the office and some of the things that we look at in terms of what worked and what didn't, I think that's going to play a big part of it. I think an analogy that we can make there is no different than business associates or folks that we work with on temporary basis, that onboard and offboard for project basis kind of a thing. So those are areas that I think we're seeing quite a bit of pain in the in companies today, just trying to keep work going.
Yeah, no, and that makes sense. I think, and I like that notion of keeping work going. I like the productivity notion. As someone who's worked from home for a while, I couldn't imagine going back. But I also have to think back to what a significant change that was when I did go through it. Now, from a BlackBerry perspective, I'm interested in how you specifically enable remote workers. And what I'm getting at is a lot of people think, all right, I went to work on Monday. I'm not going to go in on Tuesday. I have my laptop at home. Hopefully I have a VPN. Hopefully I remember to use it. What are the other considerations, and what technologies does BlackBerry specifically provide to ensure that employees are compliant at home? Because obviously there are, like you said, Stuart, there are a lot of ways around that. But take me a bit deeper on the actual products and functionality and how that goes beyond just a simple VPN.
And I think that's kind of the challenge, is obviously when you have a VPN, and going back to Farron's point around hardware, is that if you've got hardware, you've got to supply that. And now that doesn't just stop at the laptops and the desktop, and people are struggling to get those as well. It also manifests itself into second factor tokens. If you've got an RSA token or something, I'm not pushing the blame on RSA specifically, but there might be a scenario where a hardware vendor is struggling to source that. And again, not specifically a vendor that's been in trouble, but the scenario is that we need to be able to find a way in which we can work to those solutions. And the capabilities that we provided people for many years is the ability to be able to log into an infrastructure, but do it almost frictionless. And that's if we go back over the last 20 years of BlackBerry in hardware and phones and devices that they physically had, that's where BlackBerry made its name, because it enabled capability behind the firewall to retrieve mail, essentially, and then be able to use that anywhere on the go. Didn't matter where you were. You could be as remote as you wanted to. As long as you had a connection, you could get that data. And then what we've done is we've taken that same notion and moved it forward into a wider platform and created this capability where we can expand upon almost anything to gain access to websites, voice and video data, it might be communication, whatever it is, and then expand upon that, but also provide second factor through our mobile devices. So where people already have existing hardware, now the notion of bring your own laptop has been probably the last bastion of bring your own device for the last 10 years. You know, if you do a search on Gartner or on Google even, you'll find that there are reports and research that go back 10 years talking about bring your own laptop. Bring your own device was cracked for mobiles many years ago. Again, I go back to the good technology days. That's kind of where they started. That's how they began with the BYOD policy. BYOL has always been more challenging. And I think in this current world today, we see that people have to rely more upon their own devices that they have at home. But how on earth do you make that secure? If you provide a bring your own laptop or a laptop that sits at home with a VPN client, how do you know what its capability is? What is actually sat on that laptop? Is it good? Is it bad? And the same scenario sits with any mobile device. And so where we've always been considered a contained application, where something sits inside an encrypted process, the communication channel is also encrypted and protected in a container, and we can govern what can come in and out of that application. And it's not wide open. So we don't necessarily care what the device is or even what state it's in. As long as it is compliant, i.e. it isn't jailbroken, it isn't rooted, or someone isn't trying to do something illicit on a laptop or a desktop, then we will allow that connection as seamlessly as possible.
It makes sense.
Folks who have ever tried to set up a VPN is a right nearly impossible experience, especially if you don't have the right info to make that configuration, right? So user experience in terms of getting set up and spun up, and then the corporate experience of spinning somebody down or offboarding a system is critical here. It just really can't tax resources when resources to get that work done is limited. And then, right, like Stuart was saying there, what kind of trust do you have in that hardware that you're installing our software on? Take that right through the infrastructure and the pipes that data is flowing through. There's another right. You put a lot of kind of work into making sure that that your network and your the pipes that the data is traveling through are clean too. There's another solution that we get to there. So applications and right down to content. And then for regulated industries, right? Those industries that are still working today, we think about financial services, banking, insurance. We think about healthcare and the services that are provided there, where we may be taxed, but those are industries that are still working and nearly at full steam, right? So they have regulations that they've got to comply with. And how do you do that on hardware that isn't company issued and things like that? These are scenarios that are definitely coming up and facing today that we've got some answers to. It's not something that can go in right away and not something that quick, but these are things that we've been chatting with folks and kind of working through on these scenarios as they come up.
Understood. Is it fair to say that as we come out of this pandemic, right, and the pandemic is obviously introducing some extreme challenges that were difficult to plan for companies, especially in terms of compliant technology. But as we come out, I know we mentioned BYOD later and how typically maybe 10 years ago that was resigned to a phone, and now we're hearing more about laptops and whatnot. There's tons of potential. And if we come out of a pandemic, likely into a recession, I assume BYOD will be a lot more attractive for a lot of large companies. It's a great way to cut costs. If I'm a large bank or an insurance company, do I really need to be in the laptop procurement business? Do I need to be in the phone procurement and management business? How does BlackBerry view that? What do you guys see for the next few months, specifically around BYOD programs? I get the impression based on my own involvement with large companies and working for large companies that it was a big deal 8 to 10 years ago, and then the economy got great. And I see some companies, we still see, you go up to New York, you get on the subway, and you still see down by Wall Street, everyone carrying around 2 phones, multiple devices. And whether that's a sign of, a good economy or just a compliant or a fear of the unknown. But we're going to get to a world where it just doesn't make sense for everyone to carry around 2 phones. This is where a product like Movius obviously brings a lot of potential to the table as a secure second phone line on a personal device. But what are you all seeing for the next 6 months as we come out of this? What do you think some of the bigger technology trends are? And do you agree with my statement around BYOD becoming more of a mandate out there than maybe it has been in the last few years?
Yeah, I think we'll see a lot of push for this. Number one, companies, all of them have been taxed from a budgetary perspective. This has thrown curveballs at us right and left, and things that we haven't been able to prepare for from an organizational level. So organizations have been spending money. I mean, I'm speaking to folks who are hundreds of percentages, 500, 600% over budget already for the year. And
Wow.
so cost savings initiatives are going to be emergency initiatives for the remainder of the year. It's going to be, what can we do? What do we have to do? And within what resources we have left. And I think that expands, right? We look at this experience not only from our own internal workers and the kind of information that they need, but I think business associates, partners, those folks that we work with day to day that aren't a part of our organization. I think that this gives them a lot of consideration as well. I think, manufacturing and logistics and things like that, where it doesn't just stop at human to human communication, but we're starting to branch into those things that are out there and a part of our decision tree as well.
No, that makes sense.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Stuart.
No, I was just going to say, we see the scenario, if we take it back over that period of 8 to 10 years ago, is that what we see is there have been some market trend changes as well in that period. So, for example, we've seen back in 2008-10, we were seeing that people were paying, or companies were paying for contracts for their phones, but also we had roaming charges. And now this is probably more acutely felt in EMEA than it is possibly in the US. But certainly in EMEA, when you could travel from Britain to France, you were automatically paying a roaming charge.
Right.
And the further east you went, the more expensive it got. So there was a huge swathe of people that wanted to, or companies that looked at BYOD initially from a mobile point of view. It's because they wanted to lose that roaming charge, and it was an expense that was significant. So there was people who looked at SIM-based solutions, and I think that's kind of where it crossbreeds with Movius in the capability of being able to then use that on a personal device with an application that is then over a network, and it starts to smooth that out. Now, the critical part to that piece and why that works now is because we've got more, or we have wider agreements. So if I take the example of Vodafone UK, they have something in the region of 88 countries that you can buy in a single plan where you can roam with your home plan, which is something that didn't exist 10 years ago. So there's a change there, but I also have an experience with a business, actually a New York-based bank, who saved $21 million by not providing corporate issued phones. It's an immediate return on investment just by that one stat alone.
Yeah.
But then we go into what the new normal is, and this is where it really starts to get interesting. Is actually what do we expect after a month, 6 months, a year? The news changes constantly. Today I pick up the news today and it says, oh, we'll be in a form of lockdown till 2021, and then I pick up another piece of news and it says, oh, actually some of these stores that have been closed for the last 6 weeks are now opening. So there's no certainty about anything. And so the challenge is about the new normal is we need to figure out and need to understand exactly what it is without really knowing it. So the challenge is that we need to figure out what's coming, what's going, and then we need to also see what the CFOs of these large customers are planning. Now, again, I've seen, I think, a Gartner report in the last week that states that 74% of all CFOs are looking at switching their user base to be more remote work. So they're intending not to switch out of this model. They're expecting to stay as it is because it works. At the end of the day, if you're a business and you're doing as much business as you were before, or in some cases possibly more, then why would you go back to the old normal? And so we're seeing the CFO report that, but also critically, we're seeing individuals stating they don't want to return to how it was.
Right. No, and that makes sense. And I think, we went from a point, especially if you look at knowledge workers, where aside from the road warriors, right, the vast majority were going to an office every day, and now nobody is. Where do you think we end up? If I asked you to make a prediction, right, what does knowledge work look like in 2 years?
Collaboration, I think, is a big part of this, and how we work together. We've all gotten a whole heck of a lot more comfortable turning on cameras on our webinars and things like that. There's one evolutionary step that we've made here over the last couple of months, right? Your hair doesn't matter as much. And so we get a lot more of these tools. Now on the other side of that, we've seen the weakness of these tools. And so we've had to actually read through the settings and change some configurations and make it so that we can't be heckled and somebody can't put something in our share that isn't going to make folks happy, right? So, jacking our meetings and things like that. Same idea is going to go with our systems, right? So we're going to be introducing new tools to folks. We're going to be expanding their use of those tools. And I think things like, rights management is going to come up. We're going to have content that is spread on personal devices. We're going to have content that gets out on business associates and partners and stuff like that. So how do we kind of manage that one? We also are going to have to do things like audits and capture of what that collaboration entailed and who did people talk to. And so there's a whole heck of a lot of mapping out and confirming what happened in a collaborative experience, right? Looking back and proving what took place there. So rights management, the more tools on the phone to do communication digitally and to capture that content.
Stuart, anything to add on your prediction for what this world looks like from a knowledge worker perspective in the next few years?
And I think the challenge we find is that if we go down that road of enabling or working in the way that we are right now, there's also going to be a huge security shift. In terms of today, everyone knows that if you walk into a building, you have a physical security guard. 9 times out of 10, you have a lanyard with a physical card that gets you into the building. It knows you're there. You can lock off parts of that building to allow you access to certain information, whether it's confidential or public or whatever it may be. Now, how do we replicate that in a work from home scenario? You don't have a security guard sat on every front door. So the situation is, how does that actually manipulate it? You've got the broadband, which everyone uses at home, is now the weakest point of any network. Where people have paid, customers have paid billions, millions over the years into security. The entire security market is probably $1 trillion market, probably in every single aspect that you can think, physical, security, IT, whatever it is. There's a huge market that is embroiled within it. So the scenario is that as we move forward, is actually, does the shift in security move away from the perimeter in an on-premise world? Well, that was already happening because we were moving to cloud.
Cloud has forced that, right?
And so there is another scenario here, is that actually, do we find that we end up with better tooling at home to be more secure? And do we actually expedite the speed of people migrating to the cloud as well? So the knock-on effect of working from home is that most companies will recognize that if I'm working from home, well, does that mean I need to go into my premise anymore? It doesn't make a lot of sense in terms of routing traffic. So actually speaking to the cloud might become more normal as well.
No, I would agree. Changing gears a little bit, we've seen certainly an uptick at Movius in specific verticals that have been tested by the pandemic more than others, right? And a classic use case right now for us is for employees, think nurses, doctors, think financial planners, wealth managers, investment bankers that traditionally really relied on a secure communication platform, be it a secure texting mechanism, a patient portal, a desk phone that now they cannot get to. And Movius plays a huge role there in terms of providing that service on a personal device. Have you seen specific verticals that have maybe required your assistance more than others during the pandemic?
I think
workers.
yeah. That I would say financial services, banking, healthcare are certainly two of those, and just government in general. So the SLED space is another one where we've still got to keep processing applications. We think about DMV and things like that, and so there's a heck of a lot of that going on in SLED as well.
And do you find that those verticals that are now working in a new way, whether it's home or they're running around the hospital or whatever they're doing, do you find that they fully understand some of the potential security and compliance issues that they're up against, or are they just hoping for the best right now?
Well, I've gone to see my doctor, and right, the last year or so, I think we all have an answer to that one. Technology can be complex and difficult, especially when you're under stress and duress, and your mind is somewhere else. And so usability is certainly a challenge that we have to work through for those verticals, right? Financial services less so, but I think in medical profession, that's not the primary thing that a doctor is going to be thinking about, or a nurse or something like that. So ease of use has definitely got to be a top of mind here. Expansion and contraction too. We see a mobile workforce in healthcare. We see people going from Alabama to New York, right, to help out where things are crunching. And so rapid expansion and contraction of a workforce is definitely something we're seeing there.
No, that makes a ton of sense. I would ask you if you could put on your best consulting hat and think about, let's say, a CIO or a chief security officer, or even a chief HR or people officer right now. If you had one or two pieces of advice for these large, complex global organizations coming out of the pandemic, and fully understanding that we're talking about changing the way people work, how they collaborate, who's coming into the office, security, compliance, you name it. Anything that comes to mind that you're seeing with your customers, if you had one piece of advice for them to consider in the next 6 months, what would that be?
Well, the robots are coming is one thing that I'd put out there, and welcome the robot overlords, right? How the heck do we get things done when the person who usually does that is not available,
right,
or they don't have the tools that they need? And so how do we see these, what can we do to automate these processes? Rolling out solutions, onboarding people, offboarding people, right, rolling out tools and things like that. That's places that I really see us kind of putting the pedal to the metal and letting people help themselves.
But it's also, I think, from a technology point of view, there's a scenario to that which is also embedded into what we're planning and what we're doing right now with artificial intelligence. Going back to the rise of the robot. Is the situation is that we're looking at machine learning models, and actually, again, it comes back to when you're, as I am right now, I'm 60 miles away from my office in London. There's no physical way for me to get there. So if I have a challenge right now, whether it's a piece of malware or whatever, and let's say for argument's sake, I can't contact the London office, my phone dies or whatever it is, I'm then alone. So the scenario is we're looking at concepts which are using machine and math models to really drive home frictionless interaction for that purpose. Is because if I'm using my phone and I remain to be me, or I use my laptop, whatever it is, and I remain to be me, then it should never challenge me for anything. It shouldn't say, oh, I think it's you, therefore I'm going to ask you for authentication. That makes no logical sense. So the situation we're trying to get to is to say, well, if I trust that it's you, and I know it's you within a certain degree of boundary, then ultimately I allow you in. And the same scenario is also existent for what's going on with prevention. So if someone puts a piece of malware on my laptop or on my mobile device, I want to make damn sure that it's prevented first. I don't want to detect it, send it to someone who might be 3,000 miles away in an MSP or MSSP, and then be able to say, oh yeah, you had a problem last week. It's like, yeah, I know. I haven't been able to get on the network for a week. And so the challenge is that that level of automation as well around security is critical. Is it can't just be about the processes themselves. It has to be about the detection, the prevention, but also making things as frictionless as possible so that people can be productive.
Yeah. No, I agree. There's a comedian over here in the States named John Mulaney who has a funny bit around the amount of time we spend convincing robots that we're not robots. Sounds like that'll certainly continue in the future. Well, Farron and Stuart, I wanted to thank you. I know we're up against time. I've fed in a few questions from the crowd throughout this, but I just wanted to give maybe 10 seconds if there are any more out there to send them through. And if not, I'm not seeing any hands raised. If not, I'd love to say thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your expertise. Thank you for your partnership. I hope you all are staying safe. Please continue to stay safe, both outside of London in Cambridge and in Los Angeles. And we will chat soon. Thanks
Thank you
all.
very much.
Time all.